Another match where so much of what Arsenal are doing differently for me this season was put on show. Our stacking and overloading between the lines, another game plan from Arteta which brilliantly disrupted and pulled apart the Burnley block, the freedom for players such as Calafiori to go looking for trouble, for Zubimendi to kickstart those central combinations where Eze and Gyokeres too shined, Declan Rice taking more and more responsibility, and Arsenal showing how they can squeeze you, I think, in the final third way more unpredictably. Yes, it's not just set pieces. This was both a routine victory for Arsenal, winning 2-0 away at Turf Moor, but it was a win made so routine because Arsenal, who for me are in a place where they are absolutely without question the best team in the league, and they are in a place where, set piece jokes aside, have so many more ideas in these types of games that can make them look so routine, and leave our criticisms to be actually, why didn't you go and score more in the second half? Welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once again. And with 9 consecutive wins in all competitions now, it's a long old season. But let's get into the Burnley analysis, starting with Arsenal's intentions on the ball, because for me, this was another very successful Arteta game plan. After the Crystal Palace match, we spoke about how sometimes you can have all the intent and the ideas, but the execution can just be off. Against Burnley, there was more of a marrying of the two for me. Take a look at this, because we typically found this balance in possession. We formed this kind of 3-1 base, with Zubimendi often funneling out to right centre-back, leaving Rice in the middle. Eze floated into these higher central positions, but had a greater involvement I'm going to speak about as to why that was. And instead of beginning with that stack of 3 between the lines, that clustering we've seen from Arsenal against settled blocks this season, Calafiori played in what I would like to call a kind of half and half role, where he could slightly drop or spill out of the Burnley block to connect us into the final third, which kept Ugochukwu, I'm just going to call him Leslie, okay, passive in his positioning. Of course though, Calafiori would then pick his moments to go on those roaming wild adventures, but importantly, he could arrive from these at times slightly deeper zones. And look at Timber here too, who was equally important I thought at fullback, but as more of a foil, with Rice splitting and Zubimendi stacking, Saka pinning. Timber at times could ghost on the outside, and here he does that in time with Calafiori, a sign I think of how Arsenal are stretching blocks in different directions at the same time more actively this year. If we needed numbers lower though, and Calafiori was higher, Timber could drop into a back 3, and this would often allow for either Zubimendi or Rice to stack on each other higher up, but here we see Timber ghosting, like I said, on the up on the outside, which does 2 things. Firstly, it gives Anthony the decision of whether to jump onto Zubimendi and leave space behind him on the blind side, or to remain passive. And secondly, it pushes Saka into this higher pocket where, as we are going to see, and I'm going to dive into in this video, caused a lot of problems between the lines for this Burnley side off the ball, especially when their 2 pivots were man marking, and then a third Arsenal player joined the fray between the lines, and one of Burnley's wide centre-backs in their back 5 would not jump to prevent this overload from happening. As we know, as always with Arsenal, this balance that I've just gone through takes many different forms with the rotations that we have throughout the game. Here we have Rice in those deeper right spots, Zubimendi in the middle, and the stack between the lines is Eze, Trossard and Timber. But let's see how all of these began to give Arsenal a real advantage in the game. This is the build-up for the corner where Arsenal scored our first goal from. And just watch how Arsenal, I think for me, this passage exemplifies how we are more and more comfortable and threatening in these, dare I say, disjointed, chaotic sequences of play, and you can tell how comfortable someone like Zubimendi is positioning himself aggressively high here, as we've seen from him all season. But we find the balance I was just talking about, albeit a bit lopsided, which I think is a good thing for unpredictability. Rice, Eze and Calafiori, who is basically holding hands with Gyokeres, are our higher central guys, and Zubimendi is sitting. But as we know, that doesn't mean he's playing conservatively, and I actually think as he clips the ball over to Gyokeres making that in-behind run here, the punch into Calafiori dropping as Gyokeres occupies and stretches is a better pass. I'll talk more about Gyokeres, including this occupation of two centre-backs a bit later, but Zubimendi, as he tries to clip Gyokeres in, it doesn't come off. But as Trossard picks up the second ball in this kind of soft zone that's opened up just below Gyokeres' run, and Calafiori, you guessed it, is not static. Initially, he goes into the box to replace Gyokeres, but he sees a gap, sprints diagonally, and Trossard has found that really incisive connection with the Italian this season. Trossard tries to find him, we win a corner, and do I have to say what happened next? We're 1-0 up now, and the passage this time starts from a bit deeper. Look at the base we form. Zubimendi dropping, Calafiori half and half, Timber and Eze making up 2/3 of our stack between the lines, and Rice making those left to right movements to create that separation from Cullen, his marker, meaning that Rice can play that wall pass from Saliba to Zubimendi. Anthony feels that this is his moment to jump, but Rice offers himself again. Cullen can't get close to him. Zubimendi first time bounces it back to Rice, who whips one first time into Timber, who is the free man between the lines, both because of Anthony's jump and because Luiz is in between Timber's and Eze's overload, because we've got a man up in those between the line spaces. Remember as well those first touch staggered pacey vertical sequences I've spoken about all season. This passage doesn't end here, because it comes back to Zubimendi, who, playing as that kind of risk toggle, which is a really nice expression I think, in our midfield, punches into Eze. And when Eze turns like this, there is no one better at using the defender's jump and momentum against them with feints and deceptions. Eze goes past and finds Gyokeres, who brilliantly bounces it back to him. And this is why Arteta has placed Eze in these more backboardy, higher central roles, because equally, when the game is opened up like this, with Saka darting into Gyokeres' vacated space, Eze is at his best when he's got options to release in transition. He is so good in these moments. Unfortunately for him and for Arsenal though, Cullen probably makes the wise decision to hack him down, and Saka making that diagonal run is not played in. So you can see how our ability to manipulate a press or the jumps from a block to bait a team from a little bit lower down the pitch allows us to arrive in the final third with more energy and thrust. But what about a team that is inevitably sat deep and we have to break them down like we did at points in the first half against Burnley? I think we showed a lot of what we've added and improved upon this season, because how can you disrupt a team's organisation? That's a quality Arteta spoke about Calafiori possessing, but keeping with Calafiori, but also enlarging this to cover the whole team is what I want to do next. Burnley are in their 5-4-1 shape here. Again, we've got 2/3 of the cluster with Eze and Timber, but with Zubimendi splitting, it's Calafiori who's gone into the other pivot position, stacking on top, and Rice has rotated into Calafiori's half and half role, where like Calafiori and Eze as well, Rice can drop and carry us forward so well from here, and more on that and Rice in particular later, because I think this unpredictability of who takes up what role certainly is another factor for Arsenal's threat this season, and as Rice receives it in that deeper left zone, Calafiori is in this freewheeling role and he moves back and sees a gap to link with Trossard. Calafiori then speeds up on the outside, he keeps moving, he keeps roaming, and then Trossard slips in Gyokeres, who knits us together as he did against Burnley really well. Unsurprisingly, Calafiori has now spied another gap and he roams into the box, and it's not a surprise that Trossard again is the one that finds Calafiori, who genuinely is one of our biggest difference makers in the box. I'm talking about instincts, movement, and also just a deftness of touch and a deception that you pay lots of money for. Between them, Burnley don't pick Calafiori up, and Calafiori controls the awkward pass and makes something of it, superbly working room for a shot. So, disrupting a team's organisation in the final third is one thing, but what we're doing increasingly well as a team is taking advantage of those smaller gaps and windows where a team's organisation is already a bit off. That might be a quick restart or initiating those second and third waves of attacks after a near miss or a shot or a chance for us. This comes seconds after Saka's 1v1 with Dubravka, and Gyokeres is next on my list to speak about after this, don't worry. But as Burnley are in that sort of reorganising phase of play, Zubimendi plays Rice and stacks narrow. At the same time, Timber moves on Anthony's blind side, and with that space created by Timber and Zubimendi, Saka can drop in the half space to receive off Rice. Again, look at how we are stretching sides in multiple directions at the same time. Zubimendi makes one of his gutsy off-ball darts because he sees the pictures that are about to unfold. Saka bounces it first time to him, and when Zubimendi gets into these spots, he's really creative. Little slips in behind or clips over the top. On this occasion, he is crowded out, but he's the one who wins the counter press. Another brilliant way I've spoken about so much of making and creating these small windows for yourself and exploiting the momentary times when a block is going to be out of shape. And we build again. Zubimendi picks it up, and with Burnley maybe a little bit out of shape, Rice and Timber are the options behind the second line of Burnley's block, with two centre-backs as always on Gyokeres and Saka pinning. And Zubimendi now finds Timber, and this is another benefit I think that hasn't been spoken about enough of Eze in this, yes, frustratingly at times lower touch role, but a higher impact one in theory at least. Timber plays with the urgency he has all season to whip one early towards Eze in this zone just under Gyokeres, where he's so dangerous getting shots off quickly. Let's turn to some individual performances though, in more detail, and begin with Viktor Gyökeres and his first half performance. In the instant reaction to the Crystal Palace game, I spoke about Gyokeres' improvements back to goal and linking play as coming down to one of simplicity. Take the Saka 1v1 that he created. In 2 touches, Gyokeres has knocked Saka in behind, with a control on the chest and then a punchy volley over the top. That comes from first getting used to the centre-back following you, and then getting used to your teammates when they want to find you in that pocket, in that hole. And I think as a result of Gyokeres now not needing as many touches to process that contact and then to start thinking about his next actions, things are becoming cleaner. And with this platform, if Gyokeres can on top of it continue to show that kind of weight of pass, of course, there are going to be more bouncy moments with him at times, but his back-to-goal play, his bounces with teammates, is night and day in terms of quality compared to that first game at Old Trafford. I also said I'd speak about this occupation of the centre-backs from Gyokeres, because I've got a lot to say on the matter. I'll start with saying this isn't something innate to Viktor Gyökeres, and at times I think it may have been overstated. However, that doesn't make it less true, less real, and less impactful, because I've mentioned the balance between our stretching movements as a team, haven't I, when you're trying to pull a block apart. Other players might make the same run as Gyokeres, but we haven't had anyone as reliably making these runs that he has been doing. We've got used to this, I think, with the centre forward as he does here, coming lower and not always having that reliable hinging movement in behind into the space that he creates. But now, in Gyokeres, obviously, we have that in-behind movement, and I think in the end, in this example, Eze makes a really clever double movement to still get the ball dropping, though, and being strong in these situations with his body between ball and man, Eze wins us a foul. But I think the number of runs that Gyokeres makes is a real thing. And I think also we can hold two things at the same time. Kai Havertz can do this too, but sometimes it's about behaviours, tendencies as a player. There can be no question about what Gyokeres wants to do on the pitch. So can he now, on top of this, add more of these touches, linking play well? Can he add more of a threat to his real movements and his real occupation that make them not just a kind of foil to our play, but something that can directly create more goals? I've never asked for the world from Gyokeres. I see him as another really, really valuable tool and option for us, but he was so impressive against Burnley. I'm now going to move on to my more rambly thoughts on other individuals. So strap in, because I'm going to end the video in a slightly different vein here. Firstly, Rice continues to dominate as he continues to evolve, in Arteta's words. He's increasingly getting the freedom of the pitch, and that taps into his different variety of passes, his clips, switches, different angles to hit these passes at. I also said a while back I want to see Rice drive through these little gaps when he picks the ball up more, especially on the left-hand side, because there aren't too many better at doing this. He has the ability, and when we are talking about taking responsibility against Burnley, especially in the second half, when he was, I think, one of the few people not to drop their levels, he did this more and more, and I want to continue to see that. And when you add Rice's passing range and variety, his ability to hoover second balls and firefight transitions, his carrying overall distances, the timing of his arrivals and the quality he's adding inside the box. Look at this list he's building as a player. This is the kind of list that the league's very best midfielder possesses. Secondly, Jurrien Timber continues to be an index of our uptick in intent and expansiveness this season, and I think the role he played yesterday, which didn't require as much defensive action, is still one that a fully fit Ben White makes it hard for Timber to start over him in. However, Timber this season knows, I think, he's had to close the gap to White offensively, and is really doing so. My other rambly thoughts include Trossard's relationship with Calafiori is a real factor why he's starting more league games for us. I was disappointed as well when we dropped the levels and didn't score more against Burnley in the second half, and I get that a rest ahead of a really busy schedule is of the essence, but I'm greedy, and the players should be too. But finally, this was the team tracking back in the final minute against a Burnley counter-attack. Look at the team's collective desire here. This is a side desperate to get over the line this season, in a league as well where every game you come up against is against pretty much a side that can compete against you. These routine victories, it's important to add, are worth their real psychological weight in gold. And as I've said before, let's keep being the protagonists in this title race. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one very shortly. See you later.